Suddenly, he hesitated, finger over the public elevator button. Upstairs, his brother Ian's son was in trouble. The son Hayden had promised to keep an eye on. Apparently, he'd done a lousy job of it. Nor had he recovered from the shock of hearing the kid's mother's voice on the phone. Ronni Davidowski Mangano, the love of his brother's too short life. The woman who'd broken Ian's heart while he was fighting for his life. A voice Hayden hadn't heard in 13 years, despite his ongoing relationship with her son, Nick. Time for a forced thaw in their long-standing Cold War. Nick needed him. Needed them. Hayden jabbed the button. It could be worse. Ronni Mangano wanted to snatch back the errant thought the moment it formed. Life over the past few years had an uncanny way of proving it could, indeed, be worse. Tempting fate didn't seem like a wise move at the moment. She was exhausted already, so one more thing could be the proverbial straw. She glanced sideways at her 14-year-old son, Nick, slumped in the seat next to her. Or rather, one over from her. He'd intentionally left the plastic-coated, wire mesh seat on the bench between them empty. She reached across the space to poke him in the leg. The khaki pants she'd ironed only an hour ago already looked rumpled. Not the image they were going for today. "Sit up," she murmured, "and fix your tie." With a dark glare that swept first her, then the stark waiting room, Nick pushed himself upward. He yanked on the blue tie she'd retrieved from a box of his stepfather Scott's things in the basement storage room after they'd discovered that the tie Nick had worn to a family wedding only last summer was too short. "Whatever, Mom." Ronni clamped her molars together and went back to studying the gray-tiled floor. The bench opposite them, like the one they occupied, was bolted to the floor. All in all, not such a welcoming place. But then, she imagined the juvenile probation office in the Erie County Courthouse wasn't meant to be welcoming. And bolting the furniture to the floor made sense when dealing with teenagers, who at even the best of times could have hair triggers. And being in the probation office on a gloriously sunny May day didn't exactly constitute the best of times. The door to the hallway opened, and a uniformed officer escorted in a boy who couldn't have been more than 12. In handcuffs, making Ronni wonder what such a baby-faced kid could have done to warrant cuffs, and if his mother felt half as despondent as she did, as much of a failure. See, it could be worse. Nick in handcuffs was something she never wanted to see, though since he'd been arrested, he'd been caught with a backpack full of spray paint, along with some pot he still insisted belonged to a friend. At some point, he must have been cuffed. Hopefully, he'd learn something from this and get off the path he was currently on. The officer guided the kid to a seat, looming over him. Ronni jiggled her leg, checking her watch. Hayden had said he'd come. Had promised. What if he didn't? She'd swallowed her pride and 13 years of silence to contact him when at Nick's intake meeting there'd been mention that the judge might consider appointing Nick a big brother, a volunteer to provide the boy with a proper, stable male role model. And she'd blurted out Hayden's name. The rules, since Ian Hawkins, Nick's father, had died, had been that she ignored the Hawkinses, and they ignored her. Not that she hadn't deserved their contempt. She had. Did. Their scorn and anger was justified. Exceptions to the pretend you don't exist rule had been made for phone contact with Lydia Hawkins, the family matriarch, when making plans for Nick's bi-monthly and holiday visits with them when he'd been younger. Those phone calls had been polite, but to the point. Now they all texted or called Nick directly on his cell. The most she ever saw of them was through the living room window when one of them dropped Nick back at home. But Hayden had always been Nick's favorite uncle. After Dada, Unc had been Nick's second word. Hayden had spent tons of time with them, both before and after Ian's diagnosis with leukemia, until Ian's death had changed everything. Once Hayden had finished his